What is planned for the next decade of housing supply in Perth? Are we looking at the future land releases that are going to shape our city? What sort of timeframes? What sort of impacts to the surrounding areas? And is this going to be enough to cope with ever increasing demand? Even if we do have land supply coming on in these areas, and the majority of them are the outer areas of Perth, that's not to say that there won't still be demand for quality properties that are well located, that have amenities in established areas, and that's why we focus on buying in those established areas that do pass our trifecta review for the suburb, the area, and the property. If you own a property that's very similar and doesn't have any major positives, as in the extra land or the extra living area or the extra amenities, the extra lifestyle benefits, that's where you're going to struggle, and where we've seen prices get hit really hard when supply exceeds demand and there's nothing special about your place, or there's no major benefits to a buyer or a renter.
Welcome to Perth Property Insider, where you will learn how to grow your wealth and improve your life using Perth property. Our show is brought to you by Investors Edge Real Estate, the highly rated and award-winning property management, sales and buyers agency servicing the whole of Perth. Now, here's your host, Jared Mann.
G'day and welcome to Perth Property Insider. I'm your host, Jared Mann. And today I'm going into what is planned for the next decade of housing supply in Perth. Are we looking at the future land releases that are going to shape our city? What sort of timeframes? What sort of impacts to the surrounding areas? And is this going to be enough to cope with ever increasing demand? Now, what prompted this is I was scrolling around on Facebook late at night and I saw the state Labor government touting their 2,000 block land release that they've got coming up. And I thought to myself, what sort of supply do we have on the horizon? And I went about doing a lot of research, and I thought I'd bring you my findings, because keeping a close eye on the supply and where it's going and the timeframes for it to roll out is going to be really key to balancing out the demand and easing overall pressure on prices. Now, I'm an investor. I own lots of Perth property, and so do our clients. So I'm all for prices increasing over the long term. So we want that as an investor. But at the moment, the relationship between supply and demand has become so stretched that first home buyers, everyday Aussies, can't go out and buy a property without lots of stress, lots of time, lots of effort, and paying lots of money over the asking price. So even if we do have land supply coming on in these areas, and the majority of them are the outer areas of Perth, that's not to say that there won't still be demand for quality properties that are well located, that have amenities in established areas. And that's why we focus on buying in those established areas that do pass our trifecta review for the suburb, the area, and the property. So we've got the best chance of growth, not just in the short term, but over the medium and long term. So as I go through these land releases, I would be thinking, is one of your existing properties in the general area of some of these? Because the land supply going in there may help to meet some of the demand for people to live in that general area. But I wouldn't be too concerned, because if you're in an already established built-up area and your property is a bit older, there's still going to be a market for that more established property, especially if it's at a lesser price. So what typically happens is people have to pay more or the same price for less land, less living area. And so yours should still represent, if you've bought well, a good option for buyers and renters. Where you struggle is that if you own a property that's very similar and doesn't have any major positives, as in the extra land or the extra living area or the extra amenities, the extra, lifestyle benefits, that's where you're going to struggle, and where we've seen, prices get hit really hard when supply exceeds demand and there's nothing special about your place, or there's no major benefits to a buyer or a renter looking at your place over the new ones that are just up the road. And so That's where you need to be more concerned and more look at the supply that's directly coming on. But overall, it's certainly going to impact our overall market as a whole. Now, let's start to drill down and let's look at where things are at on the planning agenda. So it's an exciting topic, I think, for anyone that's interested in Perth's future. The major residential land releases and developments that are planned for the next 5 to 10 years. And I'm going to explore where these next suburbs and communities are emerging and why these projects matter and how they might impact the surrounding areas and property prices. From brand new estates on the city's fringe, we're going to cover today, to inner city redevelopment hotspots. There's a lot happening, and by the end of this episode, you'll have a clear picture of Perth's evolving landscape and what to watch for in our property market over the next decade. So let's jump straight into it. First stop on our land release radar is East Wanneroo. It's a massive project set to transform Perth's northeastern corridor. And if you haven't heard of it, you're not alone. This area has been semi-rural bush and farmland for years. But over the coming decades, East Wanneroo is poised to become home for tens of thousands of people. In fact, the state government has a long-term plan to unlock around 8,000 hectares of land here for development. How long-term? We're talking a 50-year vision, and you don't hear that much from planners very often. So very long-reaching vision to roll out this land, and it's ultimately going to make way for up to 50,000 new homes and roughly 150,000 people across the suburbs like Wanneroo, Mariginiup, say that fast 3 times, Nangara, Jandabup, and Pinjar. Essentially, a whole new city-scale community is being birthed just 25 kilometres from the CBD. So now, 50 years is a long time. So what's happening in the next few years in East Wanneroo? The project has been broken into 28 precincts with a staged approach. Not all of the land will be developed at once, and some environmentally sensitive areas in the far east will stay rural or state forest. But development is starting from the western side, nearest to the existing suburbs. And in August 2025, the first 3 local structure plans were approved to kickstart things. And these initial precincts, named Lake Mariginiup, Ranch Road, and Central Mariginiup together cover about 123 hectares and are expected to deliver around 2,000 new homes in total. So I'm pretty sure that that's the announcement that I saw for the 2,000 new homes. This includes a mix of housing types from traditional family-sized blocks to townhouses, and they're aiming to cater to different needs and budgets. So the very first stage is already underway. Construction began on an estate called Grevillea by developer Stockland, which is literally breaking ground on East Wanneroo's new suburbs. And the initial subdivision will create about 180 lots, scheduled to be delivered late 2025, early 2026. And in other words, the first residents could be moving into East Wanneroo within a year or so from now. It's pretty exciting to see this brand new community taking shape on what was vacant land. I went for a bit of a drive up there the other day. And over the next 5 years, we can expect successive stages rolling out, each adding hundreds more home sites. And by the 10-year mark, if all goes to plan, East Wanneroo will no longer be a concept on a map. It'll be several thriving new neighbourhoods, complete with new roads, schools, parks, and shops. Sort of think what's happened out to Allenbrook and Averley in the east as well, but this is going to be a bit further north. So speaking of amenities, planning for this infrastructure is built into this project, so that's good. The government isn't just carving up land for housing and leaving the rest to chance. They're preparing a district-wide infrastructure and contribution plan to coordinate the delivery of arterial roads, community facilities, and even groundwater management as the area develops. So future residents should see local parks, playing fields, and preserved bushland woven into the design. And a major new activity centre, think of it as the town centre, is planned for Nangara, which will be the economic and commercial heart of East Wanneroo, surrounded by higher density housing that tapers into lower density outward. That's going to be the new hub. And importantly, public transport is part of that vision too. So there's a future originating up train station earmarked to service that corridor. And it might be some years before tracks and trains reach there. But the idea is that eventually East Wanneroo residents will have a rail link helping them commute and connect without relying solely on cars. So we've sort of seen similar in the far north coastal with suburbs like Alkimos and Jindalee, where they were so much further from Perth. They originally had the land released, had the houses built, and then now once the train stations and the freeway have gone through, you're saving 30, 40 minutes just on your commute. It's made a massive difference, and it's really impacted the area's desirability. So back to East Wanneroo. Why is it such a big deal? For one, the scale, adding capacity for 50,000 homes in one coordinated plan is huge. And it's like adding a city the size of present-day Bunbury or a couple of Joondalups over time. So this should significantly boost housing supply, which could take pressure off prices in the longer term if done right. In the shorter term, however, supply will ramp up gradually. Surrounding established suburbs like the existing Wanneroo town site to the west or Sinagra and Banksia Grove might start to feel the effects. And as new land is released, buyers, especially first home buyers, will have more choice in that area. So that could mean a bit of a healthy competition for the older homes nearby. For example, someone eyeing an older house in Wanneroo might opt instead for a brand new build in East Wanneroo if the price is similar. And on the flip side, improved infrastructure like roads or the future train will benefit everyone locally, potentially lifting the appeal and values of the surrounding suburbs over time as well. So it's a balancing act. The more houses tend to moderate price growth, but the better amenities can make an area more desirable, and that's why we'll have to watch out how it all plays out. And it often depends how rapidly the supply comes on compared to the demand, and if the demand keeps up. So one thing's for sure, East Wanneroo represents a shift in Perth's growth for decades. Perth's grown mostly along the coast to the north and south. This plan opens up the northeastern hinterland as a new frontier. It's a response to our housing needs, but also a test of planning. Can we create a well-planned community from scratch, avoiding the pitfalls of past sprawl? Early signs are promising, with the government emphasising partnerships with industry and local government to get it right. And if you live in the northern suburbs or are looking to buy land, East Wanneroo is definitely a space to watch over the next 5 to 10 years. The first homes are just around the corner, and many more will follow potentially over a generation. So now, East Wanneroo might be the biggest expansion on paper, but it's not the only growth area. Let's turn our attention to Perth's far northern coastal corridor in some of the areas that I just mentioned, where the new train stations and suburbs are rapidly changing the landscape from Alkimos up to Yanchep. So this is Perth's fastest growing northern coast area. If you drive north along Marmion Ave or take Joondalup train line to its new terminus at the very end, you'll notice something remarkable. Suburbs are popping up where not long ago there was bush and sand. Alkimos, we've got Eglinton, we've got Yanchep. These are the names of the suburbs on Perth's northern fringe that are experiencing a boom. In fact, you can catch a train to all three of those communities now, like I mentioned. And in July 2024, the Yanchep rail extension opened, extending that Joondalup line by 14.5 kilometres and adding 3 new stations at Alkimos, Eglinton and Yanchep. And this was a major milestone for the Metronet program and an exciting day for the locals who've been waiting a while for it, or it seemed like a while. The train was packed with enthusiastic first riders on the opening day, underscoring how much people anticipated that connection, especially those that are working in the CBD and any of the stops in between. So why is a train relevant to land releases? Because the transport unlocks development, and the state government estimates that Metronet's new rail lines, including this northern extension, will help turn up 8,000 hectares of land into more desirable places to live. So in Alkimos and Eglinton in particular, there's a lot of land near the new station slated for housing and commercial projects still to be developed. And the idea is to integrate these developments from day one as true station precincts. Basically, rather than having a station plonked in the middle of nowhere for years, they've been planning town centres around them concurrently. So that's good news for those communities, I think. Now, Alkimos is a standout example because even before the train line opened, Alkimos was designated to become a major secondary centre for Perth's north. And now with the station in place, those plans are kicking into gear. Just 80 metres from the Alkimos station, construction will begin on a $25 million shopping centre, the first stage of Alkimos Central Precinct. And this precinct's managed by Development WA spans 200 hectares and is expected to completely transform the area over the next 20 to 30 years. We're talking about a future Alkimos city centre that upon completion could deliver 2,450 homes, 250,000 square metres of office space, and up to 72,000 square metres of retail and 45,000 square metres of bulky goods. So a significant, effective town centre going in still to be built out up there. And that gives a sense of Alkimos isn't planned as just another sleepy suburb. It's more like building a new city node from scratch. And over the next 5 years, initial pieces like the shopping complex and surrounding housing will start to appear. And by 10 years out, Alkimos could have a genuine town centre feel with apartment buildings, shops, restaurants, and services clustering around the station. So a lot going on there. What it sort of means in the shorter to medium term is that there'll be competing and increasing supply that'll compete with more of the coastal and existing established Alkimos houses. You're not going to replace coast and beach. And if you're on the beach side, I think that amenity is going to hold up well. But again, it's going to come down as to how quickly the supply is released and does demand keep up. But overall, I'm a lot more positive about Alkimos than I have been when I saw it down in the dumps across 2016 to 2019. And during that time, that's exactly what happened. There was too much supply, not enough demand, and prices really got hurt, but they've since rebounded. So moving further north to Yanchep, it has its own big plans. Yanchep's about 56 kilometres north of the CBD. It used to feel like a distant holiday village. I know many people have holiday houses up there. I'm actually looking at selling one for a client coming up soon who's had it as a house away from home. But not anymore. Planners have identified Yanchep as Perth's next strategic metropolitan centre, essentially a future hub for jobs, shopping and services to serve the whole northern region. The vision for Yanchep goes way back. Decades ago, landowners dreamed of a Joondalup of the north. Now with the railway having arrived and the population climbing, that vision is inching closer. To give you an idea, at the end of 2017, about 10,000 people lived in Yanchep, and today, by 2025 data, it's around 14,000, and the forecast is for nearly 38,000 by 2046. So some estimates suggest even 45,000 by the early 2040s, and that's seriously explosive growth. Hundreds of new residents moving in every year. Naturally, this development is following, and there's multiple residential estates expanding in Yanchep, like Capricorn Beach Estate on the coast, which already has houses. And in the next 5 years, expect to see the Yanchep city centre start to materialise. Things like a larger shopping mall, civic buildings, higher density housing near the station. In fact, one challenge has been ensuring services keep up. Residents and local leaders have been clamouring for facilities like a hospital, which as of 2025 is still being planned but not yet funded. Takeaway is that Yanchep is transitioning from a fringe suburb to a self-contained city, and the new rail line is a game changer that makes daily commuting from there to Perth much more feasible. It's about 50 minutes by train, not bad for that distance. And overall, that's sort of the new frontier that's taking Alkimos's place on the north coast.
Just real quick before we continue on with the episode, are you getting my email updates yet? If you're not, you're missing out on our suburb intelligence reports, which we tailor and prepare for your individual suburbs of interest, showing advanced stats and insights. Must get onto those. And I also send out exclusive invitations to our events, including webinars, sundowners, and workshops. So if you're not getting those, head on over to investorsedge.com.au/join and make sure you're receiving my email updates.
So what about Eglinton? That's a little bit further to the south and on the coast. It's the middle stop between Alkimos and Yanchep, and Eglinton is also being built up with new housing estates, Alara and others. It's slightly less high profile, but will benefit from being just one train stop away from Alkimos city centre's action and a short drive from Yanchep. And over the 5 to 10 years, Eglinton will fill in with thousands of homes too. Presence of the station means we might see some medium density housing or transit orientated projects around it as well, though not as much as Eglinton's land is currently low-lying, though a lot of its land is low-lying and likely to be traditional suburban layouts. So not as much built-up area and it's not as big a sort of city as is Alkimos and Yanchep in the plans. So all of this northern coastal development begs the question, how will it affect how existing suburbs to the south of there? So suburbs like Butler, Jindalee, Clarkson, where until recently they were the edge of Perth, and they've experienced strong growth in property values as demand has pushed outwards. So now with Alkimos and Yanchep coming into their own, the spotlight might shift a bit further north in the next 5 years, with new home buyers might leapfrog to Alkimos and Yanchep to get a modern house and land package near a train, which could slightly temper demand in the older Butler, Clarkson areas. However, increased activity and population up north can also have positive spillovers, with businesses in Clarkson and Joondalup might gain customers from the outer burbs, and the train line extension benefits everyone along the route. For instance, a Butler resident now has more employment opportunities accessible by train up at Yanchep or Alkimos, not just in the city, so they can make more of their world closer to home. According to land supply experts, the Northwest Corridor has ample land zoned and ready enough for about 12 more years of housing growth at current rates. That's more than most other parts of Perth, some of which could run out of readily developable land in just a few years. So translation, the northern coastal housing expansion boom isn't slowing anytime soon, with a pipeline to keep adding homes there without hitting land constraints immediately. So we should acknowledge the infrastructure. Besides the railway, roads like Mitchell Freeway are being extended further north. So it's reached Alkimos now and will eventually reach Romeo Road, Eglinton and beyond. With each new suburb comes new schools, shopping centres, as with Yanchep's and Alkimos's plans and community facilities. The government and developers are partnering to sequence these as the population grows. And one thing to watch is where the jobs follow the people. Currently, many northern residents commute south to work, but the long-term plan is for places like Alkimos and Yanchep to also create local employment through retail, offices, and even tourism around Yanchep Beach and National Park. And if that happens, it could really cement the desirability of these northern suburbs and sustain property values, since more people can live and work in that area. So from the far north, let's swing down to the far south. Another major land release is on the horizon in the southern suburbs, a place called Carnup, and that's with a K. That could become the next big growth area between Rockingham and Mandurah. So Carnup is being touted as a new suburb south of Rockingham that is going to be where all the action is happening for land supply release. If you haven't heard of Carnup, you're probably not alone. Today, Carnup is sparsely populated, semi-rural area 50 kilometres south of Perth, CBD, located inland from Secret Harbour and Golden Bay. It sits roughly 15 kilometres north of Mandurah and about the same distance southeast of Rockingham's town centre. So for years, planners have eyed Carnup as a logical area for urban expansion. It's identified in the South Metro Peel sub-regional planning framework for eventual development, and in fact has been considered a growth area concept since the 1980s. But only recently has Carnup moved from idea to reality. Now plans are in motion to create a fully master planned community there, and it's big. Approximately 484 hectares of land will be transformed into new suburbs over the next 2 decades. So in late 2025, the state government announced the partnership with developer Mirvac to kick off the Carnup development, and Mirvac has been appointed to deliver the first precinct, of which will ultimately be about 4,000 residential lots in Carnup. That translates to over 4,000 new homes for around 10,000 to 10,400 future residents once fully built out. However, this isn't an overnight build. It's staged over 20 years or so, and the initial precinct by Mirvac is expected to provide roughly 1,500 home sites as a start, with a mix of housing options, including some social and affordable housing. So what will this new community include? Quite a lot beyond just houses. So the Carnup Master Plan outlines a new district town centre, schools, primary school and high school, and even a 50-hectare regional sporting complex. Essentially, they want Carnup to be largely self-contained in terms of daily needs, a place where families have local education options, shopping parks and sport fields right within the suburb. And one especially interesting element is provision for a future Carnup train station on the Mandurah line. So currently, if you ride the Mandurah line after Warnbro, the next stop is the new Lakeland station and then Mandurah. Carnup station would slot in between, likely near Paganoni Road, to service this new development. It's not funded or scheduled yet, but planning the community with a transit-oriented development mindset now means that if and when a station is added, the area around it can blossom to a transport hub with a higher density housing and commerce. For now, road links, the Kwinana Freeway and Mandurah Road are nearby, will handle most transport, but it's nice to know that the train station's on the radar as the population grows there. So timing-wise, the formalities are underway, working through agreements and planning approvals with hopes to commence initial civil construction in the coming years, likely 26, 27. However, one local newspaper noted that major groundworks might not begin until around 2028. Which isn't unusual for a project of this scale, as extensive planning and infrastructure provisioning need to occur first. So in the next 5 years, we'll probably see the first land sales and maybe the first stage of homes under construction towards the late 2020s. And by the 10-year mark, mid-2030s, Carnup should be well established with a few thousand residents, its first school and a functioning town centre taking shape. Now, the emergence of Carnup is significant for Perth South because it essentially continues the urban corridor beyond where it's currently heaviest. So right now, the suburbs like Baldivis and Secret Harbour have been growth spots in that vicinity. Baldivis in particular boomed in the 2010s with massive land estates. Carnup is just east of Secret Harbour and south of Baldivis. So it's the next domino. One could wonder, will Carnup's development impact those existing areas? Possibly, but with more land supply coming, the heat might come off Baldivis a little in terms of land prices. Baldivis has periods of rapid price growth when it was one of the few affordable new living areas of Perth. And if a buyer has more choices, Baldivis versus Carnup versus somewhere like Lakelands, it can spread that demand out a bit. On the other hand, Carnup will bring new amenities that everyone around can enjoy. For example, the planned sporting complex could serve families from Baldivis, Carnup and Secret Harbour alike. And if the Carnup town centre ends up with a major shopping precinct or other facilities, it might complement Rockingham and Mandurah's offerings and save some people a drive. There's also a strategic angle. So Carnup's location is relatively close to the growing industrial and defence areas, and it's about 30 kilometres south of the Australian Marine Complex and Henderson shipyards, and even closer to the naval base at Gardner Island. So with the new AUKUS submarine programs, which I've did a whole episode on, if you look back at it, to ramp up defence industry jobs in WA, officials have noted that Carnup could help provide housing for that future workforce. And in a quote, WA's Planning Minister John Carey said Carnup had long been identified for development and is being brought forward to meet demand, including future defence housing needs. In plain terms, if thousands of jobs are coming to HMAS Stirling and Henderson, those folks are going to need homes within a reasonable commute, and Carnup's going to help fit that bill. So if you live in Rockingham, Mandurah region, Carnup's evolution will be something to keep an eye on. It may alleviate some housing pressure, making more new build options available, but could either boost or temper local property values depending on how the demand and supply balances out and over what sort of time period. So typically new large estates can keep a lid on excessive price growth by adding supply, which is good for buyers. But once they mature into desirable communities, they can also lift the overall profile of the area, which supports values long term. For instance, Baldivis was once just cow paddocks, and now it's a well-regarded family suburb, partly because it has modern facilities and schools, and Carnup could follow a similar trajectory over the next decade as it fills in, and we'll see whether it steals the limelight from Baldivis or simply becomes an extension of Perth's southern tapestry, offering more choice in the market. Anyone that's listened to the podcast for a long time would know that I've been pretty negative about Baldivis and the supply there. In more recent times, the demand has caught up and surpassed the supply and really increased its overall popularity, desirability, and prices to suit. My feeling on all these areas is that the demand and increase of employment and jobs that's coming from AUKUS, being one of the biggest projects in our state's history, is going to significantly boost and increase the demand on all these suburbs. And that said, I'm still not a big fan of buying in Baldivis and Carnup for similar reasons. I'm going to stick to the direct coastal suburbs as best as we can, because they're not making any more coast. And I think there's always going to be an increased desirability to live directly near it. We've seen it in the northern suburbs that the coast has kept the premium over the more inland suburbs, and that's what's really directing our attention. Now, let's go even further inland from the far south and talk about Byford. It's a booming suburb for expansion it's going to get on track. So Byford's been one of Perth's fastest growing suburbs out there for a while, but it's on the cusp of another leap forward thanks to new infrastructure. So it's located in the Shire of Serpentine, Jarrahdale, about 40 kilometres southeast of Perth. Byford has once a small country town. You'd pass on Southeastern Highway. Over the last 10 to 15 years, it's transformed into a major suburban area as housing estates have sprouted on former orchards and paddocks. Even so, it's felt a bit disconnected from the city, but that's changing. And in late 2025, the long-awaited MetroNet Byford rail extension was completed. So this project extended the Armidale train line about 8 kilometres further south from Armidale to reach a brand new Byford station in the heart of the suburb. And as of October 2025, Byford is officially on the train line, so plugging its residents directly into the rail network. This is a big deal for Byford because the Shire of Serpentine Jarrahdale's president called the rail line a game changer for the rapidly growing population, and that's not an exaggeration. This Shire has been the fastest growing local government in WA, and in fact was recently ranked the third fastest growing out of all of Australia. So there's an influx of families to Byford and its surrounds like Oakford, Whitby, Carnup, and it has had tremendous expansion and population growth. But until now, about 75% of residents had to leave the Shire each day for work, often driving long distances, averaging 23 kilometres on a one-way commute and then 23 kilometres back. And the new train line slashes commute times and options from Byford Station. It's a 46-minute ride to Perth, which is competitive with driving when there's traffic. It also has a large park and ride with 400 bays, acknowledging that people from more rural nearby areas might drive to the station and hop on the train. So now, beyond the transport convenience, the arrival of the train is catalysing further development in Byford. So the state government and local council has been planning a station precinct around the new Byford station, envisioning a more urbanised town centre with shops, cafes and high density housing within walking distance of the station. And over the next 5 years, you can expect to see new projects popping up in central Byford, possibly apartment complexes or mixed-use buildings, something that Byford hasn't had much of, being mostly low-density housing until now. It's somewhat akin to what happened in places like Joondalup and Mandurah when the train line reached them. The area around the station tends to blossom with commercial activity and new housing formats. And there's even talk of relocating significantly upgrading the community facilities to integrate with the station area, making a focal point of the suburb. In addition, Byford's growth is spilling over to adjacent areas. For example, Carnup and Darling Downs to Byford's north are semi-rural, now may see more residential zoning in the coming decade as pressure for land continues. And to the south, Mundajong is another town slated for urban expansion with a freight rail realignment planned and everything, but that's a bit further off. So the Byford rail extension might eventually continue one further stop to Mundajong in the longer run, but that's speculative at this stage. So how this affects established property owners or buyers in that region? Well, in the short term, having a train tends to boost interest in a suburb. Suddenly, Byford's on the map. For people who might have dismissed it before as too far or inconvenient, you might see heightened demand for housing in Byford now that commuting's easier, which could put some upward pressure on prices, especially for homes near the station or town centre. On the other hand, Byford has a good supply of land still being developed in estates like the Glades and Byford Meadows. They're adding new lots all the time, and that continued supply of new build homes will help accommodate demand. So essentially, Byford's transitioning from fringe to mainstream, and it may start to be viewed similarly to how Allenbrook or Baldivis are large suburbs that once they reached a critical mass, got better infrastructure, became hotter property markets in their own right, and had a bit more demand from people actually wanting to live there, not just because of the affordability, but because the infrastructure is now there. So a nice quote from WA's Transport Minister, Rita Saffioti, at the Byford rail opening encapsulated it. She reflected that growing up, Byford was just a rural township you'd drive through. Now it's a major housing precinct. That sums it up. So Byford has exploded in size and will continue to grow. The key is ensuring amenities keep up, and the train is one big piece. Also on the horizon are road upgrades like the extension of Tonkin Highway, which will skirt past Byford, improving road connectivity northwards. And new schools have opened, as well as shopping like the Byford Village and Lakeside Plaza. And in the next 5 to 10 years, expect more retail, perhaps a full-fledged shopping centre, more schools and more recreation facilities as the population continues to climb. So one more interesting angle was that Byford's growth and rising profile could have a ripple effect on the older neighbouring suburbs, particularly Armidale. So Armidale is the terminus of the line before Byford, and it has historically had relatively low property values. But now with the line extended and a bigger redevelopment of the Armidale city centre and station, they built a new elevated Armidale station during the Metro networks. The whole corridor's image might lift a bit. People priced out of Byford's new estates might look at established homes in Armidale or Kelmscott, which could invigorate those markets. And at the same time, some businesses might choose to set up in Byford now that it has more foot traffic, which could mean competition for Armidale's town centre. So it'll be interesting to observe what changes come about. The government's included Armidale in its list of redevelopment focus areas along with Bentley, and others we'll discuss soon, signalling an effort to ensure older centres aren't left behind. So ideally, Byford and Armidale will grow together, complementing each other. In summary, Byford is a suburb to watch this decade, and it encapsulates Perth's outward growth, but also the shift towards better connecting those outer suburbs via public transport. So interesting. A lot happening out there. And we've covered a lot today. And we've really been focusing on the outskirts so far. Now I want to head back. For those that have listened this far, don't leave yet. We've got some other interesting stuff to cover here. So let's head back towards the city. So today I've been running through the urban expansion on the fringes of our city. In next episode, I'm going to run through the infill development adding supply to our city and how that is going to transform the surrounding areas and what sort of impact it might have on property prices and overall livability. So make sure you come back and tune into that one. Thanks for tuning in today, and I appreciate it if you could like or share or give us a comment, a review. Really appreciate you listening, and I'll catch you on the next one.
Just a reminder, the information discussed in this podcast is general in nature. As we don't know your specific situation, you should always seek professional advice before taking any action. For free market reports on your suburbs of interest and other helpful resources to grow your wealth, make sure you join my property investor update at investorsedge.com.au/join. And finally, make sure you're a member of our Perth Property Investment Facebook group to be part of the conversation with other like-minded investors, get help to your questions, and get a feel for what's going on out there in the market. I'll see you in the group.